It's the 26th of April 2022, the 36th anniversary of Chernobyl, the world's second worst nuclear accident. Hi everybody, I'm the one and the only Dana Durnford. I'm also known as nuclear proctologist.org. You can call in at 709-589-4406. You can call that 24 hours a day. If you want to rat out any nuclear academics or nuclear power plants or nuclear dump sites, you can also call in. We run the Nuclear Super Scumbag Show. It took us a decade to come up with that name. It's the most appropriate name for the nuclear industry. Scumbag. Sounds easy, but the industry is completely out of control. There is no checks and balances. The regulatory agencies have all been captured in the industry a very long time ago, and they placed their inbreeds in positions of authority in increments over 7.5 decades. What I mean by that is they captured your universities and your medias and key positions in your government, and so they're firmly entrenched now, and they're like ticks in our souls. We have to deal with it. Atoms for humanity. The A-10 Warthog, did you know it only shoots dirty bombs? Depleted uranium, which used to be called DULRAM, depleted uranium low-level radioactive materials. So they rolled out this picture of Chernobyl. I doubt if it's actually a picture of Chernobyl. It's a lethal dose, anywhere close to it. Now, they claim this is the reactor core, but the reactor core at Chernobyl was 200 tons. Just 200 pickup trucks, for instance. 1-ton pickup truck with 2,000 pounds in the back of each of it. Does that look like 200 pickup trucks were the reactor core? And so you might see this picture sometimes. This is a fake picture, obviously. That person would have been dead immediately. You wouldn't get close enough to do that, for starters. And your camera can't physically work in that environment. And it's really easy to do stuff like that anyway. You just darken the picture up a little bit. And let's put me in there. I'm looking for the reactor core. So it's very easy to fake it. It's not that hard at all. Under 3% of children exposed to the radioactive fallout from Chernobyl, the world's second worst nuclear disaster, while in the womb were diagnosed as healthy at the age of 7. Okay, and so Kofi Annan had said 3 million children required treatment. Now, when it comes to radiation, if you're getting treated because of radiation poisoning, that's for life. And many will die prematurely in 2000. This is one of the models of the radioactive fallout from Chernobyl. So the reactor is burning constantly, the plume is emitted constantly, the plume starts expanding, it starts shifting as it's going over continents and countries, and it actually starts circling back. Now this plume kind of, it's, we'll just let it, I'm going to speed it up to twice the speed that it's originally set at. And in fact, I'm going to speed it up even more. So now you see the plume starting to cover large portions of the planet. So this is a serious event, right? If you look up the story here, you find out that it was actually 9,400 farms in Ireland and Scotland, the United Kingdom, were closed. because of Chernobyl 3,000 miles away. Try wrapping your mind around that. And taking into consideration that Fukushima reactors, they never closed the farms right alongside the nuclear meltdowns. So what I'm going to do for you tonight is we're going to walk you through oodles and oodles and oodles of academic studies, and this serves a lot of purposes. It also helps articulate that academics knows they know the difference. They know that radiation has incredible adverse effects on everything, all species, the biotas, the bacteria, and that they got a tendency to claim that there's not much studies on the effects on humans, for instance. This is an excuse they throw up all the time. Now, I usually do at least the anniversary of these events each year, and last year they took down my main site with no strikes and no explanation, with 24,200 subscribers on it. Now, it had 24,200 exactly subscribers for 5 years. I never got an extra subscriber and never lost a single subscriber. That's pretty normal, I'm sure. Closing 9,000 farms meant that in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom, they should have closed all the farms. They should have closed all the drinking water lakes. They should have closed all the schools. They actually should have abandoned the country. Claiming that the radiation only sought out the farms is ludicrous. So as I walk you through this, because my many presentations, this has been taken down erroneously by the industry lobbyists at Alphabet, also known as Google, aka YouTube. This information doesn't exist in these formats, and you will never find the documentation I'm showing you anywhere else online, period, put together in a big package. Excuse me, and let's get it on. The influence of post-Chernobyl fallout on birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. So when you talk, always remember how the majority of media is going to tell you there's this small exclusion zone around a nuclear power plant, but everything else is okay. And they're going to tell you that everywhere, in school, in Hollywood, in your universities, in your meetings for nuclear safety in the communities that are being assaulted by nuclear power plants. Trends in human sex odds at birth in Europe after the Chernobyl. What was going on is Chernobyl radioactive fallout had changed the sex ratio, more males to females, in all of Europe with radioactive fallout. Now, you can't do that without actually doing the same thing to all the species. The species are much more vulnerable, by the way, to radiation than humans, who are extraordinarily vulnerable. Chernobyl prenatal loss of 400 male fetuses in the Czech Republic. Secondary sex ratio, which means less. So when you have more males than females, you're having less babies. You're having less reproduction. And this is going to be symmetrical through all the species, right? So you're going to see a decrease of all species, insects, birds, mammals, animals, everything. So there is a cause and effect immediately with radiation, with nuclear power and radiation. And again, the poll tonight is Chernobyl the world's worst nuclear power plant disaster? And the right answer is no, of course, because Chernobyl was a New reactor was 200 tons, mostly graphite. It didn't have fuel pools at the top of the buildings like Japan did. Japan had 4 buildings disappeared that had lost 4 decades of their inventory, which is reactor cores, that are stored at the top of the buildings in 2 pools. Each reactor in Japan was 800 assemblies. Each assembly is around 1,800 pounds. I got a tendency, for some reason, to say 800-ton reactors, but it's 800 assemblies, and each assembly is 100 fuel rods. Each rod is 12 feet and weighs 18 pounds. In other words, it's around 1,800 pounds per assembly, and there's 800 assemblies. Secondary sex ratio trends in associated gender-specific birth near nuclear facilities. So similar studies show that even just normal nuclear facilities are releasing so much radiation that they change the sex ratio in the local area. Non-thyroid cancers. Now again, I remind you, and because as we get into this, I'm going to be burning through academic study after academic study, but it kind of build you and reinforce the profile of what's really going on. It's not just cancer, but you'll see that, and you also see the word cesium all the time, which is a gamma, where very rarely will they include alpha, betas, and neutrons and X-rays. So non-thyroid cancer, because what they've been trying to do and have successfully is been able to frame the narrative to thyroid cancers basically only with no other adverse side effects. And the people that are responsible for it, we've called them out many times over there, are incredibly bizarre creatures that with incredible educations, instead of getting a real job and living an amazing life, they took the route of lying and manipulating the population. It's the most strangest, most bizarre industry you'll ever investigate if you start seeking. It's a very confusing, and so what I try to do is give you a really good foundation to work with, and then as you go and explore this industry on your own, you have a better chance of navigating it without getting sucked into the black holes of deception that is built throughout the system, and is the entire legacy of the industry is predicated upon deception and misrepresentation and deceit and dishonesty. Okay, so thyroid, by the way, when you get all the radiation in your thyroid, it converts it into radioactive hormones. It distributes it out through your entire body, or the insects, or the birds, or the mammals, or the animals. Congenital abnormality registry is applicable to all the species, not just humans. It's a tool for assessing the public health impact. Some of these pictures are going to be very difficult, but they shouldn't be difficult because these are children with congenital malformations from Chernobyl and recognized as such. Fallout from Chernobyl accident, overall cancer incidences in Finland. Down syndrome. Now, Down syndrome is another one. Diabetes, Down syndrome, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, around 1,800 known illnesses. So the radiation makes humans and insects and birds, mammals and animals, immune system compromised, so that all species are more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and benign and innocuous. Non-thyroid cancers in Belarusian. So Belarus is full of orphanages, full of abandoned children because of Chernobyl, by the way. Chernobyl followed prenatal mortality in Wales. And Wales actually has foundations that go to Chernobyl and try to bring relief to the abandoned Chernobyl children. The nuclear industries worldwide won't even buy these children a TV set. or radio. Think about how disconnected they are from their obligations. Chromosome aberrations in the Norwegian reindeer. This affects all species with equal enthusiasm. Assessments of the influence of Chernobyl, birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. And you can see these again. Whenever you see these pictures, these are abandoned children because of radioactive fallout. Estimated lifetime effective dose to hunters and families in 3 most contaminated countries in Sweden. After the Chernobyl nuclear power plant studies. So all of these studies, and you can see the names. Now, when you see Timothy Masur, it's typically about birds, these particular studies. And he was, I won't cover it tonight, but I don't like the person. Let's put it that way. And I don't like people for, when I say I don't like people, it's for a good reason, because I've encountered them and their deceptions many times, and are able to articulate those deceptions on a drop of a hat, by the way. Differences in effects of radiation on abundance of animals in Fukushima, Chernobyl. And again, as we start flying through this stuff, you want to ask yourself, how is it that they claim there's no adverse side effects when all of these studies cost a lot of money? When you see these names, these people made money. They had to pay mortgages and insurance and car payments and transportation, and they had to raise their kids. And this is how they do it, by being deceitful and dishonest and disingenuous. The Chernobyl Tissue Bank, Geraldine A. Thomas from the United Kingdom, should unequivocally be arrested. She actually murders children with radiation for a hobby. And I'm not kidding you either. It's a hobby for her. We've encountered her hundreds and hundreds of times. It's unbelievable people like that can exist and not be arrested. It's inconceivable. They make Hitler look like a little angel. Incidences of legal abortion in Sweden. And because nobody's safe from this stuff. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportions at birth. This is an interesting way, right, to quantify radioactive fallout, is to study the ratio of males and females. Now, how did they know to do that? Because they've been studying for a very long time, see? They know nuclear is evil. When you get through this show, you will have, and you can deny it all you want, but deny all these studies. Why did they do all of these specific studies? And what I'm going to show you is just a fraction, an incredible fraction of what I actually have on this topic. That's some of the strangest things to it, too. Of course, Homer Simpson was used to manipulate your children and your friends and your loved ones for over 30 years, to disenfranchise them, to disarm them. Same as the Hulk and Spider-Man. Legally induced abortions in Denmark after Chernobyl. Pregnancy outcome in Finland after Chernobyl. Why are you doing these studies? Delayed effects of accidental radiation exposure. 15 years of follow-up. Look at all the people in the study, though. Do you really think they don't know how wicked radiation fallout actually is? Pregnancy outcome in Norway. Why did all of these people do a study with the connotations of Chernobyl in it? Early infant mortalities in West Germany before and after Chernobyl. Trends in birth and birth-sex ratio. Now, research reactors are very low-powered reactors. If they're doing studies looking at that, then it shows that there's incredible releases just from these small research reactors that are always placed deep inside of cities at universities, by the way. The industry, its entire legacy, is unbelievably, unimaginably, undeniably hideous and criminal and unsustainable. Human sex ratio at birth and residential proximities nuclear facilities in France. Human sex ratio at birth. See, and the idea of studying that is because they know everybody had to get poisoned because there's a reactor there. That's why they study it that particular way. Do you get it? Because you did already from the industry. They poisoned you before you were born from all the weapons fallout. Pollution, population exposures to just, again, gamma iodine 131 releases from Hanford in preterm birth, infant mortalities, fetal deaths. Why are they doing these studies for? Because of cover-up. Radioactive fallout, neural tube defects. They're talking about children. Global implications of Chernobyl. Global implication. Now, why would you do a study like that? Because the radioactive fallout was actually worldwide. The potential for disease initiation by inhaled beta-emitting nuclear particles, which is really rare to hear him talk about anything but gamma. Excuse me. Infant mortality after Chernobyl. Look at all the people that participated in these studies. Pregnancy outcome in Sweden after Chernobyl. Effects of the accident on the Chernobyl atomic energy plant on the outcome of pregnancy. Dental abnormalities in people living in radionuclide contaminated regions. So if you go look at United Kingdom and you look at the Donneray site and the Sellafield site, you will see these dental abnormalities are very, very clear. Abnormal retina pigment because of radioactive fallout. Leukemia. Look at all the people on the studies. Again, if you add up all of these names, it's a staggering. And you can't add them all up because there's so many of them. Prenatal irradiation-induced brain and cognitive impairment. Human sex ratio at birth after atmospheric weapons testing. Do you know what they're suggesting? They're suggesting the humans worldwide had the sex ratio change from weapons testing. And it's appropriate to think that way. Soviets' biggest bomb was equal to 3,800 Hiroshima bombs going off at the same time. It's equivalent to two countries firing 1,800 nuclear weapons at each other. The size of Hiroshima, 15 kiloton weapons. In a single bomb. That's the animosity equivalent of a nuclear war, yeah? Down syndrome, and there's a lot of these studies on time clustering of Down syndrome. It's associated with radioactive fallout. Schizophrenia is associated with radioactive fallout. Early infant mortality before and after Chernobyl. The effects of Chernobyl explosion on abortions in Italy. The resuspension, redistribution of radionuclides during grassland and forest fires. Because you can't destroy the radiation, all you can do is liberate it back into the environment. So even incinerators at 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures are not going to destroy the radiation. They're just going to liberate it into the environment. It'll drift around looking for victims. And victims are everything that has replicating cells. Evaluation of the cesium, the gamma, fallout from Chernobyl in the Alpine lakes in France. Scandinavian glaciers with highly radioactive Chernobyl deposits. And this dirty legacy lives on for millions of years, long past the human experience. Thyroid cancer in children and young adults in the north of England. And they're equating it with Chernobyl 3,000 miles away. The interesting thing about England, of course, is Sellafield. Still has 8 million litres a day going into the ocean. So whenever you hear England, it certainly did get pounded by radioactive fallout from Chernobyl. So did all of Europe. But One thing we learned doing covering nuclear is the industry, the government, the universities, and the media in the United Kingdom are just incredibly vicious, life-sucking scumbags. Fallout disposition of Monaco following the Chernobyl accident. Thyroid cancers among children and adolescents of Belarus. And of course, Belarus is full of orphanages of abandoned and disfigured children. And the nuclear industry won't even, like I said, nuclear, it always frightens me. The nuclear industry won't even give them a colored television. The children had to ask for a colored television. Nuclear industry is like, la la la, they don't exist, we're perfect. We love you, we're not vicious scum like Dana says. Fallout in the New York metropolitan area following the Chernobyl. New York, fallout from Chernobyl. See, these studies unequivocally is the documentation, the evidence, 100% evidence you can take to court that they know what they're doing. That there's no illusions, that they know that this stuff is nasty on all species on the planet. Soil plant transfer of plutonium and americium in Belarus after Chernobyl. Impact on Western Europe. Cesiums and strontium-19 coastal Syria mountains. Bioaccumulation of cesium in marine mammals, fish and flounder and haddock and cod and herring. Resuspension around Chernobyl. Tropospheric, stratospheric distribution of radioactive iodine and cesium. And so when they talk about iodine and cesium, these are both gammas, which is what my Geiger counter will pick up there. But it's a deception. And there's no doubt it's bad. Absolutely unequivocally, this stuff is bad. But they're purposely trying to make you believe that that's all exists. Just like they typically will only acknowledge cancers. They won't acknowledge all the other illnesses. But when you grab all these studies, you start aggregating Down syndrome, diabetes, and all kinds of adverse health from radioactive fallout. Again, what they're doing there is they're spraying a reagent they're hoping is going to bind with the fuel and catch the atoms, the splitting of the atoms, because the fuel is still splitting the atoms. And this is the problem when it's exposed to the environment or fuel pools. When you take the fuel out of a reactor and put it in a fuel pool, it's still splitting the atoms it did to power 1 million homes. And the amount of atoms we're talking about is just absurd. You can put 2 million on the head of a needle, but you can't see them. So how many atoms have you got to need to boil enough water to power 1 million homes? These atoms are being produced. And so they have a design out there, what they call a breeder reactor, where they capture these atoms that are what they call splitting the atoms, are perpetual machine producing atoms. It's like a snow machine. Think of it that way, where it's always producing snow, except the snow never melts for millions of years. Then you can kind of appreciate what the real picture is of this stuff. But you can't see it or smell it or hear it or taste it or feel it or touch it or pick it up or throw rocks at it. So a lot of people can't perceive it. So therefore it doesn't exist, because snow is a very visible thing, right? But radiation, you have to picture it the exact same way as snow, because the plumes is like an invisible snowstorm, except it's a dangerous radiation that's pulsing energy at the speed of light. Modeling of Chernobyl radiocesium. Again, you hear the word radiocesium. So when they acknowledge radiocesium, or cesiums or iodines, you have to say, okay, well, there's probably another 1,000 atoms in those same samples of different types of fission products, because that's actually what's going on. So they extrapolate, for instance, if you got one iodine 131, then there has to be 2 iodine 132s and 3 iodines 133 and 4 one iodine, there had to be 10 times more iodine 132, 30 times more iodine 133, and 31 times more iodine 129. The iodine 132, 133 are 9 times more effective at ionizing and radiating the thyroid gland than the very effective iodine 131 is. So they don't want to teach you this because you're going to reject nuclear immediately. And so they try to keep you locked in, and they have successfully for 76 years. For the majority of the people, they don't understand, besides the fact that the reactors don't run on cesium, they run on uranium plutonium. And that the biggest byproduct is curium isotopes, and you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium for the curium isotopes. Modeling of Chernobyl radiocesium and catchment lakes, sediments, in Cumbria, United Kingdom, is right alongside of a fuel processing facility that had a MOX fuel meltdown in the 50s that was hidden for 50 years. Still 8 million liters a day going into the Atlantic Ocean from it. So they're trying to cover up West Cumbria, United Kingdom, by blaming the radiation there on Chernobyl. Even though it most likely did get fallout from Chernobyl, it's been reprocessing mixed oxide fuel there for 70 years. And they have fuel pools there that nobody even knows what's in it. All the fuel pools are hemorrhaging into your environments. That's why most nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms, because, they love you so much. Concentrations of cesium again in Italian durum wheat. And the problem with Ukraine and Belarus is they're the wheat producers for most of the impoverished countries worldwide. Radioactive wheat. It's disgusting. It's a disgusting, revolting, despicable, murderous industry. It's a disgusting industry, the nuclear industry. They're disgusting people. They're disgusting. It's disgusting to do that to the whole planet. It's despicable. Doses from Chernobyl accident to the Nordic population via diet intake. Environmental study of radioactive cesium, which is how the degenerate scumbag academics United Kingdom will pronounce it, and Greek lake fish. They actually closed down Switzerland's freshwater fish for 30 years for something that happened thousands of miles away. Radioactivity from, again, cesium in plant drugs. So your farmers, some fields, they grow certain plants to extract drugs from it that have become, by the way, also radioactive because of Chernobyl's fault. So you have radioactive pharmaceutical drugs coming out of a nuclear wasteland. Try making that up on your own. Time-dependent transport of Chernobyl radioactivity between atmospheric and Lynchon in the eastern Canada. Potassium. Now, this is where it gets, stuff like this really freaks me out. Where the academic community has convinced farmers that if they add potassium to the farmer's field, it won't suck up the radiation. And this is what they mean by only mentioning gamma emitters. See, because gamma and potassium is assimilated into the body the same way. What a wicked, evil, insidious, monstrous thing to do is convince the farmers, oh yeah, no, go ahead and grow it there. We'll give you some potassium. It won't suck up the radiation. You won't be poisoning people. That's beyond the definition of evil. You have to stop this. You can't keep sitting in silence. You gotta go to war. You gotta get educated. You gotta start educating the population. You have to see. There was 100 people doing what I'm doing. The industry falls apart. It can't exist. It can't exist. The truth, it'll destroy it immediately. And the truth is all these academic studies. And people say that the pro-nuclear say, Dennis lying, but I provide the documentation. In fact, the documentation I provide, you're not going to find it anywhere else. I gather it up, put all my ducks together, and I tell the story. But we do this typically 5 days a week. They built the city just to run the carbon-free nuclear power plant. Does that make any sense? The influences post-Chernobyl fallout on birth defects, abortion rates. Transported Chernobyl derived radiocesium. Again, the word radiocesium from 2 freshwater lakes in Cumbia, which is right alongside of a mixed oxide nuclear meltdown and a reprocessing facility in Sellafield, which was formerly known as Windscale. But when it melted down, they went into the theaters with buses and police and stole the poor people from the back rows of the theaters. Because back in those days, the poor people sat in the back rows, right? And brought them into the nuclear meltdown to push the fuel rods out of the reactor. They didn't go to other nuclear power plants and look for volunteers. They didn't call up nuclear universities to get people to help them. No, they went and stole people. So the industry is a disgusting industry. It's time. It shouldn't exist. It has no right to exist on top of that. Food ingestion doses. Again, they're very careful to try to get away from the word inhalations. From artificial radionuclide and Colombian diets. First off, Sellafield is surrounded by farms. It's just the whole story is insane when it comes to nuclear. I better show you some depictions so you can actually, hopefully, wrap your freaking minds around it. No pun intended. So look at this nuclear power plant in the United Kingdom surrounded by farms. You'll see this worldwide. Almost all nuclear power plants, if they're not directly in a city, are surrounded by farms. And guess who eats the food and gets sick and dies? Food ingestion doses from artificial radionuclides in the diet 10 years post-Chernobyl. But they have a multiple emitting facility just a couple of miles away from them, with nuclear meltdowns in the 50s that are still going on today. Radiation doses in countries of the northern hemisphere from the Chernobyl nuclear reactor disaster. The fallout of Chernobyl radioactivity in central Ontario, Canada. The grazing economy in North Wales in the wake of Chernobyl. Like I said, it closed 9,000 farms after Chernobyl, 3,000 miles away in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom. Theft of Chernobyl data. Yeah, because a lot of the original data was jacked and hid away from the population forever. The New York Medical Institute had got a study where 5,000 studies were translated. It shows around 1 million people died. The official numbers for Chernobyl is around 36 people, according to this monster known as United Nations, who refused to acknowledge that the 600 pilots all died within a few weeks at Chernobyl. 600 pilots. A lot of these helicopters were brand new, could only be used one time because of radiation. Theft of the Chernobyl disaster. Infant mortality after Chernobyl. Look at all the people participating in these studies. All of them, they don't get paid unless they lie really good. All of these studies are basically meant to downplay it, to cover every base. And it's shocking how many bases we're actually talking about. Chernobyl radiological, social economic consequences from the province of Australia. Post-Chernobyl insight for agricultural in Canada. Because Canada's agricultural was destroyed, and then the universities convinced the complacent farmers that putting potassium in their fields, they wouldn't end up poisoning everybody. This is a ludicrous assertion, of course, but it was successfully done again. This is what I mean. Our universities are our number one enemy, for goodness sakes. And our media, of course. And, of course, the regulatory agencies have all been captured. They were created as captured regulatory agencies, in fact. Intellectual development, mental behavior disorders in children from Belarus exposed why their parents were pregnant. Radiation in milk consumed in Nigeria. 10 years after the Chernobyl nuclear meltdowns. Chernobyl victims are not mere objects of research. One academic couldn't take it anymore. I'm surprised a lot of these don't commit suicide. Inhalation of radionuclides during agricultural work in areas contaminated as a result of Chernobyl. Inhalation of radionuclides. Why are you doing a study on that? I just see a study on these aircrafts and tanks that are abandoned. Like I say, a lot of these helicopters were only used once, brand new. All 600 helicopter pilots died. And it was a waste of time to do what they done. Followed radiation doses in Norway after Chernobyl. Radiation protection in Poland because of Chernobyl. And there is no protection. The academic community says, no, don't worry, we're putting potassium in the farmer's field. You'll be okay. Eat your food and shut up, you little scumbags. Pay your taxes and shut up. Post-Chernobyl, because the taxes pays for these academic studies, right? There's 4.5 million academic studies each year in North America paid for by the taxpayers that are weaponized against the population and are hid behind the paywalls of the Elsevier, Springer, and Wiley, who gets the academic study for free, puts it behind a paywall. So you can't find out what's really going on. And Elsevier, Springer, and Wiley, by the way, they have 22,000 of the world's biggest journals. So when you see a lot of these studies are from the same journal, imagine that I haven't got access to 22,000 journals. I can only get access to 3 or 4, see? Imagine how many studies actually exist on this topic. And then imagine they have the arrogance, the hubris, to claim that they don't know if there's any adverse effects from radiation. The people that tell you that should be arrested and publicly held accountable. Downward migration of gamma in organic soils across Scotland. This was a story I was reading, and they didn't know how to equate Chernobyl. So they said Chernobyl surpasses any and all of the terror in The Exorcist, The Shining, The Human Centipede, put together. And what's more, it's real. It actually happened. That was their way of grasping it. And for somebody who don't know any better, it was appropriate. Like if the scariest thing to dress up, as far as I'm concerned, for Halloween is an academic. You're the scariest. You should win any costume contest. All you do is dress up as a monster, aka an academic. Radiation exposure due to Chernobyl. Well, we know that there's all these orphanages in Belarus and Ukraine. And the call the industries heartless doesn't really do it justice. You got to call them monsters. There's nobody in jail compares to a nuclear scientist or a nuclear academic. There really isn't. They're in their own level of evil. And whoever created the J-value assessment, I have incredible contempt for these people. This is a weapon used to disenfranchise the victims. The fate of, again, you see the word cesium constantly. That's the distraction. When you see cesium, you got to think about 1,000 other isotopes. Uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontiums, curium. Nasty. Curium is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods. The fate of cesium in forests, which is gamma. So they rarely acknowledge, again, see, they're barely acknowledging gamma, but you got to acknowledge alpha, neutrons, betas, and they all pulse energy every second, almost at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per millisecond. And each of these different emitters, gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas, when they hit each other, they'll change direction. It's known as a braking effect, but it's happening. It's going 186,000 miles per second. It's coming at it 186,000 miles per second. They hit each other and change direction. And that creates a brutal sterilizing X-ray effect that'll... So when it lands on your ground or hovers close to the ground, it can pulse at each other from 50 feet away and cause these effects. It sterilizes all the species in your forest. The fate, and they don't reproduce in increments over decades, they disappear. The fate of the cesium in forest soils of Russia and Ukraine contaminated due to the Chernobyl ionizing radiation effects and soil biota. So radiation gets close to the soil or in the soil. It's sucked up into the plants, to the tip of the plants as the plants are growing. They're sucking all the nutrients up to the tips of the plants, right? Well, that's where the radiation ends up. This is why you're not seeing spiders tying on to plants anymore, or trees. They're tying on to your houses and your vehicles. And this is what I've been studying for several years, in particular on the East Coast. We've done the research on the West Coast. Ionizing radiation effects on soil biota. The soil doesn't break down because the radiation kills the bacteria. So the forest fires are much more intense because the litter didn't break down. Time trends in radiocesium in Japanese diets following nuclear weapons testing and Chernobyl. And implications for long-term contaminations post-Chernobyl. Secondary radioactive contamination of the Black Sea. Characteristics of thyroid cancers. Wildfires in Chernobyl contaminated forest risk to the population because you reliberate it. But the forest, that's one thing they noticed about Chernobyl was the forest didn't break down because the bacteria was missing. Now we're seeing the same thing throughout North America because of Fukushima. Effects of radionuclides contamination on the leaf litter decomposition in Chernobyl. Once again, it doesn't break down, see? But look at all the people on the study. Clinical presentations on a pediatric thyroid. Again, they always try to frame it towards just thyroid cancers. Geraldine Thomas from the United Kingdom is one of the biggest cover-ups involved in it. And she kills children with radiation in the hospitals legally. And then is out there doing presentations and lectures telling people that it's harmless, like a banana and a potato chip and flying on a plane and climbing a mountain. This is it's not sustainable. This is absolutely unacceptable that people like that are allowed to exist freely in society. It's completely unacceptable. That creature should be arrested, and there should be documentaries on her and the monstrous deeds she have carried out. Biogeochemical cycles of Chernobyl-borne radionuclides in contaminated forest ecosystems. So they understand quite well how deadly this stuff is. Salutability of hot fuel particles. Individual radiation dose calculations. Stress effects of Chernobyl. Distributions, and this is where you see this plutonium acknowledged, of 239, 240 in the Black Sea ecosystem post-Chernobyl. Preliminary comparisons, radioisotopes concentration in sewage sludge. Did you know they can't get rid of this? They can't get rid of the ashes from the incinerators in Japan because it's so radioactive. They can't get rid of the sewage because it's so radioactive. They can't get rid of the sediment from the water reclamation facilities in the communities because it's so radioactive. It's absurd, right? Because they're excreting so much radiation. They're throwing so much radiation from the litter in their houses into the garbage and then they're consuming it through water on top of that and breathing it, obviously. Fukushima Chernobyl accident, environmental assessment, U.S. Hanford site waste management. So they do comparisons because they know how evil this stuff actually is, but have for decades and decades told the population that none of this exists. Officially, none of the stuff I'm showing you exists. The official story is none of this is true. But go ask every one of these academics whether it's true or not. Clinical aspects of pediatric thyroid cancer, again, framing it as thyroid cancers only. When there's 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries long before cancer. How is our poll doing tonight? Is Chernobyl the world's worst nuclear power plant disaster? And somehow or another, we got 11%. Really? There's actually 11% of people are so stupid they think a single reactor is worse? Nah, that can't be real. 44 votes, and the right answer is no, of course not. How can Chernobyl possibly be the world's worst nuclear accident? It's absurd to suggest it. Radiation-induced cryogenics. They're talking about the exclusion. See, now they're talking about the exclusion zone. But as I'm showing you, the whole world should be an exclusion zone, right? Insight into uranium tolerance for bacteria. There is no tolerance. Because as you go through time, it destroys everything with replicating cells. Simulation of the cesium transport disposition over Russian peninsula. Chernobyl form major findings, recommendations, radionuclide transfer to wildlife at reference sites, and resultant radiation exposure. Remember, none of these officially exist. The official story is none of this is true. But I can assure you everything I'm showing you is Chernobyl. Again, you see Geraldine Thomas. Whenever you see that, that's a demonic demon that should be arrested and jailed in a dark dungeon forever. Radiation impact Chernobyl in the soil. Look at all the people on that study. Do you think they're doing that because they're bored? No, this is, by the way, they're doing a study to downplay it, to quantify more nuclear worldwide. But when you look at all of these studies, because this is nothing I'm going to show you so far, this is not even a fraction of the fraction of what I got, you come to the real conclusion that this is an insidious, out of control, and deeply, insidiously, revoltingly death cult. Does Chernobyl-derived radiation impact development stability of Quatius, certain species in freshwater and saltwater? Long-term effects of ionizing radiation after Chernobyl. Possible contributions of historical dose. Possible. It's impossible for it not to be, right? Properties of Chernobyl lava. Again, remember, there's pictures out there shown up in media all the time with someone pretending they're taking a picture. You can never get nearer, and they're pretending that's the 200-ton nuclear core right there. Remember, that's 201-ton pickup trucks we're talking about. You can see the handrails behind it. It's just, it might not even be Chernobyl. See, the industry is that twisted. And so once a picture becomes folklore, then they weaponize it. And that's what we think is happening right there. Because how do you get a picture of something like that without getting a lethal dose? And cameras back then couldn't get close enough to take a picture. Some people have suggested it was taken with a mirror from far away. Again, that's simply not true. This is stage lighting you're looking at, by the way. See the little shadows and stuff like that? It's perfectly lit up. It's not real, as far as I can tell. Land use in agricultural landscapes because of contaminated with Chernobyl. Can we be confident in radiological safety of plant foodstuff? Of course you can't. And so this is another study that they use in tandem with the potassium, giving farmers potassium and telling them that's going to stop the cesium. But what about the uranium, plutonium, and americium, neptunium, and strontiums, and curium, and 1,000 other fission products? The people that say that, as far as, like, they need to be arrested. This is an actual crime. This is the same as murder, except it's genocide. Integrating research on, again, thyroid. And you see G.A. Thomas again. What a horrible person. The police should arrest her. Once they expose her crimes, the world will demand her execution. Long-term assessment of contaminated articles from Chernobyl. Population of liquidators after the accident. And you'll see United Nations claiming none of the liquidators had any adverse health effects. The ultimate betrayal, of course. And these so-called, you know what a liquidation is? It's a sale. You're getting rid of stuff. And they call these people liquidators, getting rid of them. They're making their own lead vests. These are not nuclear scientists. There was no nuclear scientists. There's no nuclear academics. There's no nuclear companies. There are no nuclear corporations. There are no nuclear power plant employees, supervisors, no nuclear deans from the university. No participation. Victims of society. Genetic characterizations. Again, thyroid cancer. But look at all the people that participated in that particular deception. 30 years after Chernobyl, what lessons have we learned? Nothing. We learned nothing, didn't we? The response profile, because they covered it up. None of this is officially exists, what I'm showing you. None of these studies actually are recognized as officially existing. Why did you ban on all the trains? The response profile of chronic radiation exposure based on Scots pine from Chernobyl affected zone. But as I'm showing you, all countries have affected, including Canada, for goodness sakes. Forensic study of early stages of the Chernobyl accident. Stories of 3 hot particles. Chernobyl derived radiocesium for reconstructing changes in erosion rates and sediment in European Russia with different levels of Chernobyl followed. So they're using radiation as a marker for changes in land. Reconstructing disposition environment, long-term fate of Chernobyl cesium, floodplain scales through mobile gamma spectrometry. Efficiency compositions, vertebrate scavengers, land-water interfaces in Chernobyl zones. They've studied every single species, every single insect, every single bacteria, every single species of tree because of Chernobyl worldwide. Study of a hot particle. And they're using zirconium. Clue to a supercriticality during the Chernobyl event. Direct isotope analysis of Chernobyl microparticles. Again, the J value, the people that came up with the J value were incredible traitors to humanity. Genome-wide DNA changes because of Chernobyl and Fukushima. Modeling the external radiation exposure from Chernobyl fallout using data from Sweden, municipality measurement system. Cesium, and why would you put K, which is potassium? Reactors don't make potassium. annual fluxes in cropland and forest ecosystems 24 years after Chernobyl. I really hate when I see the word potassium in studies. I think these people all should be questioned on their motives immediately. Comparison to Chernobyl and Fukushima. Again, right, they're claiming Chernobyl is the world's worst nuclear accident. I'm asking my viewers, is Chernobyl the world's worst nuclear power plant disaster? And 89% appropriately said no. And a fake 11%, a confused 11% somehow thinks it is because they've been brainwashed by media or they're disingenuous. I can't remember what isotope that is, to tell you the truth. Ratio in Chernobyl groundwater. Look at all the people in that study, my goodness. Followed from Chernobyl and overall cancer incidences in Finland. So Finland should have been doing studies on heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. Not just cancer, right? When they do just cancer, it's a very dubious study. Chernobyl and Fukushima. Dietary habits during 2 months following Chernobyl. Again, right, talking about thyroid as if thyroid is the only illnesses that are going to manifest or be diagnosed. Well, it's the only one that is legally allowed to be diagnosed for Chernobyl was thyroid. Due to the work of incredibly evil people. Impacts of Chernobyl on the health and labor market performance. Airborne survey of Chernobyl contaminated mountain area in Norway. It's madness. Transylvania contaminated in Romania after Chernobyl. Mental health and welfare. You'll see a lot of studies on mental health where they blame the victims for having radiophobia. Oh, you're just mentally something wrong with you. Were your parents stupid or something? Retrospective. When you see just one person on a study, a lot of the times you really got to wonder what's going on, but you can't get access to a lot of them. Some of them you can, certainly. DNA damage, repair, changes in the seedlings of soybeans. Again, right, they do these studies to quantify growing soybeans or wheat, of course, because Chernobyl in Ukraine, Belarus, is the wheat production for most of the planet. It's so evil, it defies any logic whatsoever. Causes, consequences, and problems of radiation measurement. Yeah, you got a perpetual lying, destructive machine in the industry. Human dietary exposures to cesium. And possible mitigation measures in Ukraine. How the hell did they ever get away with this? How can we have a future when these people actually exist and are taking over our planet and are poisoning all species, not just humans, you know? Behavior accidentally released radiocesium in soil, water, environment. So all of these studies, abundance of birds in Fukushima as judged from Chernobyl. We got studies showing there is no birds and no insects in Fukushima, by the way. Relationship between the abundance of soil, surface, and vertebrates and radiation. Again, you're seeing that they study every facet of the ecosystem because of radiation fallout. It's not because they're bored. Particle size distribution of radioactive aerosols after Fukushima and Chernobyl. Long-term census data reveals abundant wildlife population at Chernobyl. Now that study, the only species that they identified were migratory species. Big species like bear and elk and wolves. And so the headline is very deceiving, it's very deceptive and deceitful and dishonest. Justification of remediation strategies long-term after the Chernobyl. Justification of remediation strategies, like putting potassium in the farmer's field and shipping the product. They know you can't stop the radionuclides from being uptake by the plants because it treats cesium, for instance, the same way as it treats potassium. You can put all the potassium you want. If the cesium is there, it's going to be sucked up by the plant and by proxy bioaccumulated in the victims that are consuming those products. Chernobyl syndrome, which is 1,800 illnesses and diseases, by the way. And again, let me apologize because I got a tendency to get upset every time I hear the word cesium over the last couple of years. Because you got to realize I'm at this all day, so you only see a little bit of what's going on. And because I'm on a camera, I'm a very, very public person for a very long time. And I bring you I don't have to, see, but I go through a lot of work to bring you the documentation so nobody can deceive you. You can say, no. I seen the evidence. It's overwhelming. Maybe I get it wrong on 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 of these studies, but I don't get it wrong on all of them, okay? I'm human. I can make mistakes, but it's rare. I'm not allowed to make mistakes, see? When I make mistakes, they're chopped up and used against me. I can do a 2-hour show. If I have a Freudian slip, years ago they would chop that out and say, they don't know what he's talking about. Look at this. But meanwhile, 2.5 hours was perfect of the presentation. It was just this Freudian slip where I might say 5 instead of 5 million. Cumulative disposition simulated by means modeling. Are organisms adapting to ionizing radiation at Chernobyl? I hate these particular studies where it'll end up in Scumbag Popular Mechanics, which was bought by a lobbying group and is used to bludgeon people worldwide. Most people, when they first get a computer, older people that is, will end up at Popular Mechanics for some reason. And that's the worst spot you can go to. They're 100% propagandas. Every time I got to cover a story of Popular Mechanic, it causes me nothing but agony. The lies are just incredible. It's actually despicable to see that we've been taken over by this revolting death cult known as nuclear. A dose rate causes no fluctuating in silver, birch leaves, and Scotch pine needles. Like, after Fukushima, you weren't allowed to pick pine needles in Tokyo because a lot of people will pick pine needles, cut the tips off, and boil that to make a traditional tea. But radiation aggregates in the tips of these plants and pine needles and stuff like that. So they say no fluctuating changes in silver birch leaves. But you can't quantify that, right? Because first off, you're going to have radioactive pollen, that they're going to ignore that spiders can no longer tie their webs on to these positions anymore because they're pulsing energy almost at the speed of light anymore. Because spider webs were typically a good way to study the insect population. I used to use it. Spider webs, you would check for spider webs and you would see all the different species of insects. You can't find a spider web on the west coast of Canada in the forest or the east coast. Non-thyroid cancers. So when you hear that word non-thyroid, it's like, we found another cancer. We think it was Chernobyl. That's the way they act. Because he wants you to believe mostly it can only be thyroid cancers. If your thyroid is irradiated so bad you end up with thyroid cancer, it meant you converted an absurd amount of radiation into radioactive hormone also. Radiation measurements made in Belarus during the first 3 months. Dose rates from cesium followed. Again, this word cesium is just in settlements in Russia, Belarus, more than 2 decades after the accident. You really shouldn't call Fukushima or Chernobyl an accident. You should call them an event. These are events that changes the sex ratio of species for countries and planets. Lessons learned from Chernobyl accident in Norway. Chernobyl radiation, again the word thyroid cancers. Differences in effects of radiation on abundance of animals in Chernobyl. And again, this particular study was trying to claim there was lots of species there. When the only ones they were actually acknowledging are the migratory species. You know, it might come to as a shock to those people, but deer and antelope and elk and bears and wolves don't use Geiger counters, don't know the difference. If there's no activity, then it's friendly land to them, you know, if there's no human activity. 137 cesium activity in Sweden. Why are they producing all of these studies if there's no adverse side effects? Reconstructing the Chernobyl nuclear power plant event 30 years after. A database of air concentrations disposition measurements over Europe. Again, non-thyroid cancer. Exposed Belarusian residents. Belarus, again, is full of disfigured and abandoned children. The influence of biotic and abiotic factors on cesium accumulation in fungi. Lots of species eat fungi. Factors associated, again, thyroid. High frequency of albinism and tumors in free-living birds around Chernobyl. High frequencies of tumors in birds around Chernobyl. Informality survival in Ukraine nuclear landscape. Living with the risk of Chernobyl. No increase in thyroid cancers among children and adolescents in Finland due to Chernobyl. Right, again, focusing on thyroid. And thyroid could take 10, 15, 20 years to manifest and be diagnosed. But you could be sure that Finland, which had many, many abortions, by the way, legal abortions because of Chernobyl, and many documentations of polluted lakes and rivers and streams and mountains and farmlands, that there is incredible amount of adverse effects going through that country. Transfer of cesium, plutonium, and anti-strontium into bird, bats, ground-dwelling small mammal species within the Chernobyl exclusion zones. Increased stress in barn swallows. Acute radiation sickness from Chernobyl. Iodine nutrition in Chernobyl before and after. 25-year review of psychological consequences. Yeah, like psychologically people were damaged by the lies and the deceit and dishonest disinformation that was perpetrated against the victims. Measurement of long-term external internal radio exposures in Banks region of Russia after Chernobyl. Pre- and post-Chernobyl accident levels of iodine 129, 137 in the Baltic Sea by brown seaweed. Effects of Chernobyl claim, like there is academics out there claiming that being exposed to man-made radiation, and you see this like in cartoons where like Spider-Man becomes all these powers because of a nuclear waste and that from a spider, And that the Hulk, for instance, right, has all these superpowers because he was affected by radiation. And so a lot of scientists will claim that the radiation is good for you. It makes you stronger. Makes your immune system stronger because that's the evil industry. It's really something. Overviewed ecological half-life of cesium radioisotopes. So when you see cesium, you got to replace it with 1,000 other fission products, not just cesium. In the Eastern Black Sea, in Turkey, effects of non-human species of radiation. Model assessments additional contamination of water bodies as a result of wildfires. Redistribution, liberating the radiation back into the environment. Distribution migration of 90 strontium components of the Dnipro River basin in the Black Sea ecosystem after Chernobyl. Again, when you hear childhood thyroid cancers, these people make me sick. Radiocesium contamination of beef in Croatia after Chernobyl. Are radiosensitivity data derived from natural field conditions consistent with data from controlled exposures? A case study, Chernobyl wildlife chronically exposed to... Listen, there's pieces in the Chernobyl forest found by guides that were several sieverts doses. These are not low doses in these forests at all. Chernobyl assessing the health effect 30 years later. And again, look at the amount of studies I'm able to bring you. None of these officially exist. All of these are denied by your medias. All of these are denied by your pro-nuclear communities. Post-Chernobyl pediatric thyroid cancers in Belarus. I think the academics that unacknowledged thyroid cancers are wickedly evil, incredibly, insidiously evil people. Studies of populations exposed to Chernobyl followed. Extended critical, like guinea pigs, human guinea pig populations. Once you get exposed, now you're a guinea pig for the scumbag academic institutions. An extended critical review, 20 years of countermeasures used in agricultural, 20 years of countermeasurements used in farmland, which is dumping potassium in the farmer's field and convincing the farmers they're not going to end up poisoning everybody. The radiation won't be uptaken. This is madness. This is voodoo science. This is absolutely, unequivocally 100% criminal, what we're talking about here. It's unacceptable that there's people on the planet that actually do this stuff. Convince farmers that putting potassium is going to stop radiation from going into the plant. And by only acknowledging gamma on top of that. These people are genocides. Look at the people who participated in the study. Lots of them. Their job was to stab you in the back. Stab your loved ones in the back. That's their job. The majority of these academics are to stab you to death in increments over time. A review of possible origins of the uranium plume in the aquifers in Chernobyl exclusion zone. Again, look at all the people on these studies. It's terrifying. Result of thyroid cancer survey in Russia following Chernobyl. When I see all these names in these studies, that terrifies me. That all of these different people making a living by stabbing you. Now, I don't know how much my microphone... I try not to slurp when I drink the water, but it's hard on your throat sometimes when you're talking. Because I get emotional sometimes. I try not to, of course. When you're covering this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, year after year after year, there is some post-traumatic stress going on there because you can't stop the crime, see? You're able to identify the crime. You're able to point out the perpetrators. You're able to articulate what the crime is. You're able to provide the documentation evidence it is a crime. But I'm treated as a criminal for exposing them. And remember, of course, officially, none of this exists. The official story is none of this is true. You make up your own mind. Is it true or not? Site-specific cancer risks in the Baltic cohorts of Chernobyl cleanup workers. That was the ultimate betrayal, wasn't it? Where they claimed very few of the workers had any adverse side effects. Even today, they'll claim that. And there was over 600,000 that we know about. A lot of them were conscripted. They were jacked off the street with buses and by people with guns and brought to the nuclear meltdown. That's a fact. 30 years after Chernobyl, overview of risk of thyroid cancers based upon unclear scientific report. And unclear is United Nations. You see, the UN is United Nations Scientific Committee on Radiation. These are criminals. This is just a corporation. United Nations is just a corporation. It's a very big, very powerful, but it's just a corporation. It's an illegal corporation. It's sedition, what is going on there, where you got 195 militaries that have incredible access to the government purses of each country and have been given this money. The money they're given, they're being used now to take over our planet. This is our planet, not their planet. Chernobyl, Fukushima nuclear accident, and this is the 8 million species planet first, by the way. What has changed in the use of atmospheric dispersion models? Our dietary reports in a case control study on thyroid cancers based on risk perception of Chernobyl followed. Our dietary reports and case control studies on thyroid cancers. Because they really do want you to believe only thyroid cancer is possible with radiation. Right? People like Geraldine Thomas, for instance, are been perpetrating that hoax upon our population for quite a few years. The nuclear industry, the people in the nuclear industry are completely out of control. I have never come across anybody in the nuclear industry that acts like a normal human. None of them seem to have any of the attributes of a normal human. Abundance and diversity of aquatic invertebrate communities and lakes exposed to Chernobyl. So they're studying every facet you can conceive. Perception of risk and subjective health among victims. Subjective. There's 1,800 illnesses and diseases, remember? It's not just cancer. Chernobyl Health Medical Cooperation Project. Determination of dose rate. A single atom sequestered in your muscles, your organs, and your bones is attacked for the rest of yours or the insects or the birds or the animals or mammals' life with white blood cells until they build a tumor around it. But it compromises your immune system and you're more susceptible to illnesses and diseases that were normally harmless, right? Chernobyl disaster 30 years on, lessons not learned. Radiation and risk again of the thyroid. I just despise these people. Rural areas affected by Chernobyl. There is no areas not affected by Chernobyl. There is no remediation. You have to get out of the environment. This is what makes them incredibly dangerous, is they refuse to evacuate people. Like if you look at Fukushima, all these communities with incredible numbers and they refuse to evacuate them. It's surreal that it exists. And that the Congress lacks the authority to make it illegal to poison you with radiation. So it's not illegal to poison you. See, if it was, they couldn't give you radiation in a hospital, could they? Do Chernobyl-like contamination with cesium and 90 strontium affects the micro community, the fungal biomass, the composition of soil organic matter? Yeah, 100%, because it kills all the creatures that cause stuff to break down. Down syndrome time clustering in Belarus linked with Chernobyl. And look at all the people on that study. Validations, Chernobyl, few particles, Chernobyl cooling pond. That's a scary thought. Chernobyl radioactivity persisted in reindeers. In Latvia, even today, you can't sell the reindeers because they're still too radioactive. Because of Chernobyl. Radiation exposure due to Chernobyl accidents. Chernobyl in grass. Cesium again in grass. Current situation, non-cancer diseases. There's around 1,800 of it. Kidney failure in infants after Chernobyl. The industry is insane is one thing you'll learn quite quickly if you hang around. Urban forest conditions, successions, and abandoned city of Pripyat, which is right there. 129 iodine with a 15 million year half-life, and there's 10 half-lives. 150 million year shelf life for anthropogenic iodine 129. In the lakes of Chernobyl fallout region, environmental implications, it destroys the chromosomes in the DNA. It's not a huge distance emitter, but it's consistent for 150 million years. So if you get iodine 129 in you, it's in you for 150 million years. It's a joke, by the way, because you won't exist. Applications: Chernobyl derives cesium, but it will in water and soil for 150 million years. Application: Chernobyl and Canada, United States got hit by 220 million atoms. It was an Ottawa study of iodine 129 per liter, each liter of rainfall. Sustained after Fukushima. This is why you don't clean insects off your windshield anymore. Application of Chernobyl-derived cesiums for the assessment of soil redistribution within a cultivated field. Again, right, they're trying to quantify using a field that is radioactive. And saying, oh yeah, well, we can put potassium in it and it won't suck up the radiation. So go ahead and farm all you want. That's what they've done. That's what they continue to do. Like Ukraine, Belarus is the biggest distribution of wheat worldwide comes out of there, from nuclear wastelands. It's so evil it defies any kind of rationale. It really does. But the urgency of the truth is we're running out of time, right? We had Fukushima happen, and together we're in real trouble on this planet. And we got to make Earth's last stand. You are at Earth's last stand in reality. All I'm doing is informing you and giving you the documentation. And if you deny it, then you're not being realistic. The industry generally doesn't hang out here. They only come here to taunt me or insult me, but they run away like cowards. Because I will brainwash them quite quickly, even though they generally have no compassion for life whatsoever. DNA damage in barn swallows from Chernobyl. Reconstruction of radioactive plume along the Chernobyl's western chase. Radiation hazards in children. Lessons from Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, which they covered up in Fukushima. Chernobyl is right by a major freshwater. It runs right alongside the building, right? So it sweeps it all the way down to the ocean, which is 600 miles away, but there's a lot of drinking, a lot of communities live along that river. It's an incredibly polluted river. I put a link down below the video about that river for you. If they dredge the river, they'll poison 28 million people, is what they were saying. Bystander effects induced by serum from survivors. Again, bystander effects induced by serum from survivors of Chernobyl. Just the thought of what they might be talking about in that study frightens me, that claiming that if you were irradiated and we take a serum, make a serum from your blood, we can inoculate other people. We've actually seen studies like that where they try to perpetrate those types of deception. Downward migration of Chernobyl-derived radionuclides in soil in Poland and Sweden. And once again, the J-value assessment, these are scumbags. These are incredible scumbags, those people. Disgusting parasites on our planet. Optimizing treatment for children and adolescents with thyroid cancers. Again, not acknowledging all the other illnesses. It's just, you kind of lose faith in humanity, see, when you're doing what I'm doing. Microdiversity in contaminated soil along the trench of Chernobyl experimental platform. Look at all these people on that study. Radiocarbon dissolved humic substances in the river waters from Chernobyl. Predictions of cesium activity concentration, atmospheric surface layer to Chernobyl exclusion zones. Stakeholder engagement in regaining decent living conditions after Chernobyl. The industry is insane, isn't it? Ecological lessons from Chernobyl. The only lesson was how do we trick humans? How do we destroy the rest of the species and humans? Chernobyl tissue bank, Geraldine A. Thomas. That person should be arrested immediately. That person is murdering children in hospitals with radiation. That person is a perpetual lawyer going around doing presentations claiming that radiation is harmless, like a banana and a potato chip on top of that. What? Why not? And she has so many degrees that make you sick. And she spends her whole life destroying humanity and particularly children. Because children can't fight back, see? An absolute predator. Retrospective determination of cesium Pacific activity distribution in spruce bark. Bark aggregated transfer factors of forest on a scale of Czech Republic 10 years after Chernobyl. Mutation rates in Scots pine. Thyroid cancers in children and adolescents in Ukraine have been exposed as a result of the Chernobyl. Lifetime effective doses to hunters and their families. We covered that study a little earlier. Carson, it must have been another study because I'm pretty good. I have to check that out one of these days. The only problem is I got too much. I work so hard to try to give the world a fighting chance. I'm not bragging or anything like that. I'm just saying, I wish there was more people doing what I'm doing. We take the load. Carcinoma of the stomach following Chernobyl. See, it's so rare to hear about cancer anywhere else besides thyroid, These people were set out on the roof, surrounded by nuclear fuel for 25 seconds, and then sent home. None of them were nuclear academics or nuclear scientists or nuclear students or nuclear universities. None of them. I see we're being spammed on our poll. How the hell can you get 15% saying that Chernobyl is the world's worst nuclear disaster when Chernobyl was a 200-ton reactor? Each of Fukushima reactors are around 700 tons. And they had fuel pools at the top of each building. Like you're talking about at least 100 reactor cores comparison. But the problem was that Fukushima was pure uranium, pure plutonium. Chernobyl was mostly graphite. Nowhere near, but Chernobyl is brutal. I'm not saying it's not, and I'm showing you that it's 100% brutal. But it ain't the world's worst nuclear accident. And to be so petty to come in and spam my video claiming that it is 15% is pure desperation. But it shows you this disconnect of the industry. They don't regret being evil. They actually take pride in their evilness. So they studied the radioactivity in so many ways, it boggles the mind. You can't keep up with it. Plutonium from Chernobyl and Poland. Assessment of cumulative external doses. Just typical, we see a lot of that. From Chernobyl for a forested area in Russia using blah, blah, blah. So, you can't have external doses of radioactive fallout without internal doses too. You simply can't have one without the other. But a lot of times you only acknowledge one. Scott's pine is a promising indicator for biomonitoring in a polluted environment and a chronically irradiated population. Man-made anthropogenic evidence for selection and response to radiation exposures. Acute kidney injuries after Chernobyl. Very rare. See to hear him say anything about thyroid, right? Ukraine's exposure to ionizing radiation after Chernobyl. Now, another thing to remember was that Russia didn't build that. In fact, Russia didn't help at all. It was 10 major countries worldwide had to pay for that. Decades too late. And it doesn't 100% contain it. It's meant as a deception. It's meant as deceit. And it was meant... This cost I can't remember the actual number, 2.3 billion or something. It's absurd. So much money stolen there, you can barely wrap your mind around it. Suicide risk among Chernobyl cleanup workers in Estonia still increased. It's a 2006 study. Radiocesium Lebanese soil a decade after Chernobyl. Applications for mollusks, mussels and that, for monitoring of Chernobyl. Radioactive contamination forced ecosystems from Chernobyl to Fukushima. Agricultural recovery of a former radioactive area. It doesn't work. You can't agriculturally recover a radioactive area. You can't do that. Radiation is not just to that single farm. It's going to be the whole country is covered in order for that farm to be radioactive. A protein map of flaxseed harvest. Yeah, I know I won't be eating that no more anywhere. You can't trust the industry, man. Distribution pre and post Chernobyl radiocesium. Again, the word radiocesium. From particle size fractions. Accumulation of cesium again in bottom sediment of Finnish lakes. Chernobyl fallout by chemical separations. Near-field radioactive particle dynamites, empirical fallout patterns in the western northern plumes from Chernobyl. Territory contamination with the radionuclides representing the fuel components. Of all the people on these studies. What have we learned from Chernobyl? What have we still to learn? You got to learn, and this is Geraldine Thomas again. Mrs. Evil that needs to be arrested and held accountable. The Chernobyl accident, aquatic biota, chapter 13. Chernobyl fallout, prenatal mortality in England and Wales, 3,000 miles away, with their own meltdown close by these children of Chernobyl. Chance irregularities. The industry is just pure evil. Fukushima upgrade to new Chernobyl. This was really interesting. I mean, the Fukushima reactors are gone. They don't even exist. And just absurd amount of more material than Chernobyl. And they refuse. And last night I was playing clips. We got a lot of that to play in the near future. Of the official cover story, right? The Japanese government for many days had put out an hour and a half presentation following the nuclear meltdown in Japan. And that stuff is just, the information of that is just staggering. The cover-up is surreal. Let me keep her going here. Uncertainty assessment of Chernobyl fallout. Influence of Chernobyl accident, thyroid, non-tumor morbidity. Use of iodine-129 and cesium in soils from estimation of 131 iodine disposition in Belarus. Right, so if you know one isotope, you can do a pretty good calculation to understand what other isotopes would have showed up. Public uptake of science, Chernobyl, Sellafield, and environmental radioactivity science. Now the industry is unbelievably corrupted and no longer functional. It is now weaponized against all the species. Resuspension of coarse fuel hot particles. That's terrifying. Medical consequences of Chernobyl in Ukraine. Psychiatric legacy of Chernobyl, and then equate that with Fukushima. This is trash can diagnosis is what we're talking about there. Analyst of Chernobyl accident to the first power excursion. Vertical distribution of radionuclides in soil of a grassland site in Chernobyl. Now remember, none of these studies officially exist. United Nations refuses to acknowledge all of these studies I show you tonight. Radiological effects on populations in the Chernobyl contaminated zone. So how is it they don't know nothing about it, but yet they seem to know everything about it? How does that actually work? The amount of studies is really something. Nuclear weapons, Chernobyl debris in the troposphere, lowest stratosphere, which means that's worldwide. And it takes a long time for that to fall out on top of that. And you can't even keep up with these studies. A lot of these studies are just like, what? And you got all these people producing studies that who knows what the frig they actually are. Worldwide, we're seeing just endless amount of this. Evaluation of stable iodine status in areas affected by Chernobyl. Well, the one thing we know for sure is when you hear current academics and scientists talking about radiation, saying there's little evidence of any adverse side effects from radioactive fallout, these are they know what I'm showing you. I got a guy that I want to cover, which was on the 15th of March 2011, the official, a doctor who come out and he told so many lies. It's an hour and a half straight of propaganda, and we got to challenge every one of these lies one of these nights. He starts off with the radiation emissions from Fukushima are classified. Then he tells you every song and dance and lie for an hour and a half. It's really something to hear. I was listening to it last night when I was trying to fall asleep. And then when I woke up this morning, I put it back on, and I couldn't drink a cup of tea because I blew up laughing every time of how evil you must be to do what he was doing. Like, woo! And he's a doctor. Chromosome aberrations in inhabitants of Belarus, Russia. Consequences of Chernobyl. Long-term psychological distress among the Belarusians. Yeah, of course, because everybody's telling them no adverse side effects and they're all getting sick. Their children are born with congenital malformations. A three-dimensional model for dispersion of radioactive substances in the marine ecosystem, application to the Baltic Sea from Chernobyl. Monte Carlo, used to measure milk contaminated as a result of Chernobyl. Is there anything Chernobyl didn't contaminate on our planet? And then think about how bad Fukushima actually was. which was infinitely worse than this, and this is nasty. Plutonium, cesium, strontium, and invertebrates, some areas around Chernobyl. It's just, how do you keep up with all of this? Radioiodine-induced thyroid cancers, assessments of radionuclide migration from near surface, radioactive waste burial sites, waste dumps, and Chernobyl exclusion zone. Kidney cell cancer after Chernobyl, lessons of Chernobyl. Chernobyl fallout in the uppermost layers of forest soil in Finland, northeast Russia, the Baltic countries. Chernobyl wasteland to be greened by biofuels that are going to take the nuclear waste, nuclear radioactive litter and burn it. And so you're just going to liberate the radiation back into the environment. Application of potassium chloride to a Chernobyl contaminated lake. These are insane people, eh? They'll poison the whole planet and they'll be happy. They'll spend the rest of their life doing a study claiming there's no adverse side effects. Their children will get the same education. They'll get the job after. Their despicable inbreeding parents have left the field. Reconstruction of thyroid doses after Chernobyl. I despise these people in particular. Mutations show no increase in the children of the Chernobyl liquidators. So they're saying that these children don't exist. Which explains why these children don't even have a color television. Nuclear industry refuses to acknowledge that they exist. It's a despicable industry, isn't it? Validations, iodine-131 transfer, thyroid dose assessment again. Look at all the people they're trying to deceive you, manipulate you. In river bottom sediments over eastern France, 16 years later. Accumulation by fish. The Black Sea inflow at Chernobyl, strontium-90, a bone seeker from the Dnepr River to the Black Sea, detecting contaminated induced tree stress within Chernobyl. The fish's main contributors internal dose to lakeshore residents in the Chernobyl contaminated area. Because, like you said, they closed freshwater fishing in Switzerland for 30 years. Radio-resistant bacteria from Chernobyl. And those academics, right, that come out and say the bacteria is radio-resistant, as if this, and now they're going to use it to consume the radiation. These are incredible bullshitters. These are number one first-class bullshitters. Soybean thrives despite Chernobyl. That should frighten the daylights out of you that these people actually exist. So what if something thrives? Radioactive, still radioactive. Plankton is an indicator of temporal variations of Chernobyl fallout. Because plankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestration chain, can be extinct pretty quick, right? Medical monitoring survivors with acute radiation syndrome, which is unusual to acknowledge even that. Cancer incidences in Belarus and Chernobyl. One thing we know for certain, that the industry is insane. 50 years after Chernobyl, new evidence is the thyroid cancer. There's 1,800 illnesses. What about them? Interpretation of varying selectivity of cesium-potassium uptake by radish. So what they're trying to do is make it acceptable to sell the radish, again by using potassium. They claim they're going to displace the cesium as if, and even if that was true, which is not, because cesium potassium acts the same way. It's not going to displace the cesium. It's ludicrous to suggest that in the first place, but this is what they've been doing, see? And then that's now considered acceptable now to go ahead and grow the radioactive food and ship it because some scumbag, degenerate, coward, journal activist or academic said that their studies showed it got displaced, when that's ludicrous to suggest that potassium can displace everything or anything. Assessing effects of radiation abundance of mammals and predator-prey interactions using tracks in the snow. I do that each winter where I'll go out and look for tracks in the snow. And the last 4 or 5 weeks, I haven't done a lot of it. We did go on a research expedition because of a mass bird die-off here 2 weeks ago. We estimated about 500,000 birds starved to death, seabirds. Congenital Abnormality Registry in Belarus is a tool for health impact of Chernobyl. Short and long-term patterns of cesium in fish and aquatic organisms of forest lakes in southern Finland after Chernobyl. Current situation, future planning of radiation health effects, Chernobyl and Simplexta, which is a nuclear test site, 3D numerical modeling of mud radionuclides, transport in Chernobyl cooling pond in the Dnepr River and estuary, the Bug estuary. Is there anything they didn't do 100 studies on, I wonder? Vertical migration studies of cesium from nuclear weapons fallout in Chernobyl. Finland, Chernobyl, radionuclide migration in the Red Forest waste site in Chernobyl, the groundwater transport model, aerosol migration near Chernobyl, long-term data and modeling. Transport of radioactive particles from the Chernobyl accident, post-Chernobyl thyroid. Again, Geraldine Thomas, one of the cruelest humans on our planet. Variations, transfer factors, radio cesium and bank folds. They're like little, they're little tiny mammals, right? A lot of them we have studies where they showed them they become sterilized over generations. Alpha-emitting transgenerational isotopes in Belarus following Chernobyl. These people would have got sick and died not too long after. They're on the roof for 25 seconds or so. That's a lethal dose. Classifications of hot particles from Chernobyl, nuclear weapons detonation. Retrospective dose estimates in Estonian Chernobyl cleanup workers. Remediation strategies for rural territories contaminated by the Chernobyl accident. Radionuclide content in lichen in the forest adjacent to Chernobyl. The effective source is an anti-strontium for a stream near Chernobyl, Ukraine. Aerosol radioactivity records in Slovakia following Fukushima. A comparison of global fallout in Chernobyl. Extremely complex patterns of mutations in germline of wheat exposed to post-Chernobyl radioactive contamination. And of course, that area is the biggest wheat producer today worldwide. So you need studies saying it's okay, see? Even though it's not. Global local cancer risk after Fukushima, and they had the same studies for Chernobyl, by the way. Global cancer risk after Fukushima and Chernobyl. Global cancer risk. You won't see those connotations with any other industry worldwide. Blind testing of models predicting 90 bone seeker, 90 strontium activity concentrations in river systems using Chernobyl's models. But a lot of, you can't really use lawyers' models and call that and quantify that as an actual study. Kinetics of Chernobyl fuel particles in soil and natural conditions. Measurements of cesiums and urine and estimations of internal doses of adults exposed to Chernobyl. Calculation of disposition of cesium from nuclear bomb tests and from Chernobyl in southern parts of Sweden based on precipitation. It's very vague. Incidences of legal abortion in Sweden after Chernobyl. Genetic consequences of radioactive contamination by the Chernobyl fallout to agricultural crops. That's an understatement of the century. Chernobyl, the invisible thief. Elevated mutation rates post-Chernobyl families from Ukraine. I showed you lots of pictures of that already. Transfers of cesium, plutonium isotopes, and 90 strontium to birds, bats, and ground-dwelling mammals species within Chernobyl zone. Sources of present Chernobyl-derived cesium concentrations, surface air, and disposition samples. There's so many studies, right? And that's the thing about what I'm showing you. Is these studies, eyes wide shut. Radiation hazards caused by Chernobyl accident in inhabited areas of Ukraine can be monitored by transgenic plants. And so do you really want to be eating the plants on top of that if you can model it with plants? You can model with plants because plants assimilate it, see? The history of Chernobyl contamination of the floodplain soils, relations to physical, chemical properties. Reindeer husbandry, the Swedish market for reindeer meat and Chernobyl effects. Rogue cells and Chernobyl cleanup workers. Technetium-99 in the stratosphere from Chernobyl, which is a rarity. Mention stuff like that, even though that should be the mention all the time. Cancer incidences in Ukraine after Chernobyl. Forest and forestry radiation protection measures with special references to the Chernobyl zone. 30 years after Chernobyl and 5 years after Fukushima. Geraldine Thomas. Disgusting parasite on our planet. Modeling of dynamite of fish contaminated by Chernobyl radiocesium. And talking about potassium balance, putting potassium together. These are lunatics, the people that do that. It's just heartbreaking that people like that are allowed to exist. They really should be destroyed. Trends in the human sex odds at birth in Europe and Chernobyl. Nuclear power plant accident. Trends in human sex odds. Again, right? Implying that Europe, the sex ratio of males and females was changed. Estimation of dose received in dry, contaminated residential area in Russia after Chernobyl. Long-term investigation radiocesium activity concentrations in carp in North Croatia after Chernobyl. Prenatal loss of 400 male fetuses in the Czech Republic. The ICRP, these are scumbags by the way, model for cesium intake by lactating mothers with Italian data after Chernobyl fallout, which doesn't just, this takes decades for the fallout to all come out of the atmosphere. Chernobyl to be encased in steel. Chernobyl. Iodine-131 exposures using 129 and cesium inventories in the soil, right? And they can extrapolate plutonium, uranium, americium, neptunium, and the rest of that from that legacy. It's a cover-up, right? Radioactive contamination of the aquatic ecosystem following Chernobyl. European countries contaminated. Small mammals at 3 sites within Chernobyl, estimating the exposures. Chronic leukemia patients exposed to ionizing radiation due to Chernobyl. 25 years after Chernobyl. Time-dependent americian activity environment from decay of plutonium released into Chernobyl. Atmospheric dispersal and disposition of radioactive material from Chernobyl. These folks love to cover all bases, right? Chernobyl experience. Catastrophe consequences. It's appropriate to use those connotations. Thyroid glands and radiations 20 years after Chernobyl. Look at all the people in this study. Interaction between uranium and bacteria. That's unusual to see them even acknowledge uranium, despite the fact that's what the reactors run on, right? Chernobyl still in the hills. Radiocesium concentration factors of Chernobyl contaminated fish. A study of the influence of potassium. Because they use that we hear that everywhere, where they're trying to use that to quantify that if you use potassium, then the food is okay to be harvested from radioactive farmland. This is simply not true. This is what I mean. These are crazy, criminal lunatics. Thyroid in children and adolescents influences. Cesium from Chernobyl and I put river catchment area of Russia. Look at all the people in that study. That's terrifying when you see that many names. Because most of these studies are meant to cover up. And look at the cover up. There's so many facets they got to cover up. It's absurd. It's absurd. The studies I showed you already is hundreds of millions of dollars. The accelerated occurrence of age-related changes in organisms in the Chernobyl radiation-induced syndrome. Really? Anybody surprised? Public responses to Chernobyl. And a study on everything. They really do. Comparative radiation impact on biota and man in the area affected by Chernobyl. Concentrations, environment samples collected. Chernobyl operators, criminal or victims? Criminals. Impaired swimming behavior of sperm from burned swallows. 90 strontium migration from waste burial in Chernobyl. Investigation of food contaminated since Chernobyl fallout. Time-dependent behavior, radiocesium. Can't have cesium without uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium. Influence of pH, mini microsatellite mutations in children from Chernobyl cleanup accident. Look at the people in that study. Agricultural recovery of a formal radioactive area can't be done, by the way. And the flax seed. So they do the study to quantify continuing to produce radioactive food by claiming that it's Chernobyl-related ionizing radiation exposure, cancer risk. And in all honesty, you can't keep up. You can't possibly keep up. Contaminated soil in their chemical iodines, ecosystem remediation, radioactive polluted areas. Cardiac valve diseases from radiation. A strange place. Studies from children exposed to ionizing radiation. Cortisol treatments and free radical oxidation traumatized cleanup workers. Chernobyl accident. Gamma dose rates from terrestrial Chernobyl radionuclides. Fuzzy human reliability analysis. That's such a strange study. Chernobyl cleanup workers, 17 years of follow-up in Latvia. Beta-emitting radionuclides in soil adjacent to Chernobyl. Persistence. Cleanup workers suffer from low doses. You didn't get a low dose if you were a cleanup worker. Features of human tooth tissues affected by Chernobyl. Northern Italy, Chernobyl radioactive fallout. Migration ability to radionuclides in soil vegetation in Belarus after Chernobyl. 30 years after Chernobyl. 30 key papers. How many have I showed you tonight, I wonder? 400. The transport, distribution, experimental studies, radioactive aerosols in the vicinity of Chernobyl, ingestion doses in Finland of strontium, cesiums from nuclear weapons, Chernobyl, debate over health effects of Chernobyl reignited. It should never stop, should it? Groundwater resistant time, Chernobyl pilot site constraints, legally induced abortions, environmental radioactivity legacy sites, Chernobyl. Cesium fallout from Fukushima rivals Chernobyl, really. Testicle not altered allegedly, which of course that's impossible. Iodine-129 in soil in northern Ukraine after Chernobyl. Soil-dependent uptake of cesium by mushrooms. Don't eat mushrooms. I won't eat mushrooms anymore. You have to be insane to eat mushrooms again. Studies of Chernobyl debris in Denmark. Behavior of radioactive silver and rubidium in environment. Association of dissolved radionuclides by Chernobyl accident and colloidal water. Geochemical influence of waste. Atmospheric long-range transport application Chernobyl releases. Medical consequences. Experiences of a 15-year study. You can't keep up with it. Concentrations of technetium-99 in the forest soil. Well, technetium-99 is such an important one because you can use it to quantify other isotopes. Cesium isotopic composition of environmental samples across Europe. Vertical distribution of cesium in the grassland, soil distributed by mold. Suppression of the genes of the voles, which are these small mammals, very tiny mammals. Thyroid cancers in children, adolescents. Understanding the legacy of Chernobyl. We'll go back to the start of the video and watch it. On the distribution inventories of radionuclides in sediment around the Swedish coast. And the Chukchi Sea, anthropogenic man-made radiation from Chernobyl. The stratospheric fallout from Chernobyl. Thyroid doses from Chernobyl. Look at all the people in that study to downplay it. Chernobyl fallout salt from Poland. Nothing is sacred to this industry, is it? They just destroyed everything. Indications of limited altered gene expression in the trees from Chernobyl. Vegetation, fire, smoke emission, dispersions of radionuclides are reliberated back into the environment. Transports from rivers to the Kev Reservoir, drinking water. Determination to technetium within 30 kilometers. Hair mutations because of Chernobyl. Thyroid cancers again. Ingestion of Chernobyl in Akita City, Japan. 137 inventories in small agricultural drainage basins, which is just frightening. Everybody's eating it is going to get sick eventually from it, from the bioaccumulation of it. Case studies of thyroid cancer in young children exposed to radiation fallout after Chernobyl. Health effects, Chernobyl acts, fears, rumors. I showed you the truth already. Thyroid cancer incidents after Chernobyl in Belarus and Ukraine. Distribution of chromosome damage from Chernobyl cleanup workers. Chromosome damage! Genetic disorders in house, mouse, and germ. Fractional fluctuations, aerosol concentrations near Chernobyl. Radiation dose aquatic organisms near Chernobyl. Hot particles from Chernobyl. Get your hot particles. Simulation Chernobyl's radioactivity in breast milk placentia during the years after Chernobyl. Impact on Austria from Chernobyl. Sources, inflow, distributions of strontium in salt lakes of Crimea. Radiation damage aspects of the Chernobyl accident. Dispositions of artificial radionuclides And soil inventories in France because of Chernobyl. Abundance of birds in Fukushima is judged from Chernobyl's. Radiation burden due to fallout in Austria from Chernobyl. Chernobyl and the Swedish moose. Cesium uptake in crops grown in Chernobyl regions. You shouldn't be growing anything in Chernobyl. You're lunatic industry. It's absurd. Transfers of cesium strontium-90 to dairy cattle fed fresh. Testing out of food chain models used in Chernobyl. 30 years biological dosimetry to assess risk of health effects. Radionuclide alpha activity in soil and plant samples in Chernobyl. Association of cesium in tea leaves fermented from Chernobyl contaminated green tea. The effects of Chernobyl on electric utility stock prices. And 15 years observation of thyroid cancers among Ukrainian children. Transfers of radiocesium from uncultivated soil to grass after Chernobyl. Radiocesium removal from European lakes and reservoirs. There's a friggin' lie for you. Determinations of isotopic composition, plutonium, hot particles. Atmospheric distributions of barium and cesium contaminated studies, example of sparsal structure, behavior of Chernobyl, cesium in the Adriatic Seas, in the River Delta, and this is normal, by the way. Size estimation of radioactive particles released in the Chernobyl accident. They got a study on everything. How many fingers am I holding up my back after Chernobyl? They got a study somewhere on that. Chernobyl cesium in the sediment, 10 years of Chernobyl. Blah, 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 blah. Everything's contaminated by this insidious, lunatic, crazy, batshit. And it's an unregulated industry. It's an industry that has a license to murder and commit genocide and ecocide and omnicide. No checks and balances whatsoever. We're the closest thing on the planet to a checks and balances right here. I can't keep up with it. How many of these studies does it take for you to appreciate what the truth is, I wonder? Hopefully not as many as I showed you tonight, but just in case, this is just a fraction of the studies I actually got. Right? So this will drive you, sometimes, like this could drive a person crazy when I'm trying to go through all this. And like, how do you tell the story without including this one? How do you tell the story without including that one? And how do you tell the story, see, by excluding some of these studies? How does that work? How do you quantify something like that? Because you can't rationally, because it could mean something really important to you or the next person or this person or all of you. But in order to do that, I can't sit here for days and show you every one of these. I can't do it. But I on the flip side, the problem is the academic community will tell you none of this exists. They'll call me a liar and everything else. None of this exists. Dana's a liar, despite the fact that I only show you the documentation. I don't have an opinion or conjectures. I would give you the documentation. Things I say are based on documentation only. There's no reason for me to inject my own personal opinion. It's pointless because I have so much evidence to quantify the truth on its own, you know? And the whole thing about this is you can't keep up with it. Even if you tried, you actually can't keep up with it. I'm only trying to be a sensible voice in a sea of deception. And I'm showing you an absurd amount of deception, but at the same time as documentation. A lot of these studies are to to downplay these facets, right? That doesn't mean it's not true. Because we have so many studies to quantify that statement, right? And this is why I get upset, because I'm exposed to this constant deception and deceit all the time. So sometimes I get a little irate. Sometimes I'll lash out and wish I didn't after, of course. And sometimes, well, the big flaw with me is I'm a human. That's my flaw. Unlike these people, I'm actually a human. Where I care. I truly care about everybody. I care about the species. I care about the future generation. I care about my loved ones and your loved ones equally. I don't care about your race or your religion or your ideology. I really don't. You're a human. You got the same hopes and dreams as me. Period. Doesn't matter what the color of your skin or what your, how rich or poor you are. That don't mean nothing. I'm no better than anybody, and as far as I know, nobody's any better than me. We're all on this experience and this ride together, and we are obligated. It's our obligation to stand against evil, to make that stand. Somebody has to make that stand, and whoever it is, they're gonna get tortured, and they gotta have a thick skin. They gotta have a resolution. They got to stand stoic against the endless assault, the endless lies, the endless attacks, the well-funded attacks at that. And I understand that I happen to have a lot of these qualities, and so it's appropriate that I try my best, and that I built this whole operation to inform the population of the danger that they're in the hopes that, I always felt that hundreds of bloggers would pick up this information. That tells you how naive I was a long time ago, because it's never happened. And that I would be able, I always thought that, I'll just expose this industry with all kinds of documentations, get everybody up to speed, and sit back and watch the slaughter, right? It didn't happen. So all these years later, I still have to I have to wake up every day and put on my war face and go to war and dig up the documentation, come out, and hopefully the world will come to its senses and make a stand. Because this is Earth's last stand we're talking about. Right? This is Earth's last stand. Whether you realize it or not, or whether you accept what I'm saying is not, if you don't accept it, it's because you haven't looked at the stuff that I provide as documentation. Because I'm methodical about it being impeccable, that I cover all my bases. And I can guarantee you, I know how to cover all the bases. I've been at this so long that I'm extremely good at it, but it's not fair, right? It's okay. Like I say, it is what it is. But what terrifies me is when I do my research expeditions and I see the extinction event, and there's no way to deny it, and I have to struggle to raise enough money to complete it, and quite often I can't complete the actual expedition because I'll run out of money. That breaks my heart. There's nothing easy about what I'm doing. I get busted up, I'm frozen, I'm isolated, I'm very vulnerable. If something goes wrong, I don't have money to bail me out. And so that puts you under a lot of stress, whether you like it or not. But you got to do the research to quantify it, because this is life and death. And in the hope that the world will come to its senses. And it didn't. I can damage this industry in a very short period if we had a foundation or individuals that was able to fund this operation, where I can create a bunch of people that are articulated too, and so we're all doing this, exposing the industry from all these different angles. I would like to create a 24-hour a day like TV studio where we cover radiation and a deception each day. And so we catch their lies as they're putting it out there. And then you would like to have a team of lawyers to litigate these people, go after their degrees and stuff like that. I've been at this long enough. I could run a full-on war on this industry and win it. I really can. And I can take them apart in just a very short period of time. And anybody who knows me for any amount of time knows what I'm saying is true. Has no doubt what I'm saying is true. I'm ready to go to war against this industry because I'm going to war against this industry for a very long time. Don't drink the Fukushima sake. Particularly if you got hairs on your chest, James. Lucid. It's hilarious. Alrighty, so we'll let this continue to play out. I got it in auto mode now. Every 5 seconds you're getting a new study. I can't keep reading all of it. My throat's funny giving out, so we're basically going to call it night. I'm going to come in and do a shout out to everybody. We'll let all these studies that I do have racked up continue to play while we do a shout out. But I mean, I'm not going to accomplish anything by keep going and keep going and keep going tonight. I probably, actually, who knows for sure. See, that's the problem with this story. But for the Chernobyl anniversary, there is nobody on this planet in history has done what I've done for you tonight. There's nobody has brought you this incredible wealth of documentation. There's nobody. This is only a fraction of what I got on top of that. That's the maddening thing to me anyway, is I wish you can all go through everything that I got, because then you will see all these different facets of nuclear fallout. This is applicable to 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and Fukushima and Sellafield and Santa Susana and Mayak and Switzerland. And it's applicable to radioactive fallout around the world. All of this is, that's how you have to approach radiation fallout. You got to do hundreds of thousands of studies on every facet of it. It's mad, right? This is madness, what I'm showing you. And then they come in and have spam bots come in and claim that Chernobyl is worse than Fukushima is ludicrous. And Chernobyl's brutal. It's brutal. But it's not. Compared to Fukushima, it's not. Is Chernobyl the world's worst nuclear power plant disaster? And the appropriate answer is no. 86%. And the 14% that said yes are spammers. That's the industry. And if you go out and you type in the world's worst nuclear accident, you're going to get the phone book of media thrown at you. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of stories, and where they'll mention that Chernobyl is the world's worst nuclear disaster. This is an absurd assertion when Fukushima is infinitely worse. But look how bad Chernobyl actually is. So Fukushima is terrifying, see? It's absolutely unimaginably terrifying. I'm going to do a shout out before I close the poll. Yeah, thank you, Dana Nasana, for moderating and being our friend. And James Luce's salmon are dying at sea, which is 100% correct. And the wise person, you're welcome. Thank you, appreciate it. PBS lover, thank you. I'm going to go up to the comments section, come down through it. Thinker, Richard. Good night, everybody. Tree Fruit, Stephen Young. Hugs for Stephen Young. I hope you're feeling a bit better. Stephen's going through a long, terrible, difficult recovery. He's got a long way to go. We're happy that he's back in some capacity, but he's been through hell. That poor man has. And he has supported us for a number of years relentlessly, and we won't forget that. That was during very difficult times, and he made a big difference by doing it. Peace where Marjorie Vincent. Hi, Marge. I didn't see you, Marge. I'm sorry. You seen... Yeah, I didn't see you. No, sorry. I would have said hi, Marge. She knows that. Richard, I was going around all day looking for a bolt for my ignition coil, and I can't find one. So I went to a machine shop this afternoon and asked them to make me one. And they're expensive to make, by the way. And we Obsolete Optics donated 120 last night. And that's a big deal, and we appreciate that so much. Thank you again for doing that. John Schiff Fetti, I'm always going to butcher your name, my apologies. Port Angeles. I hope everybody has a great night, great day tomorrow. I'm just going to run down through the names and say goodnight to everybody as best I can. I'm going to miss a few. I noticed I'd done that last night, the night before. You got to realize I'm flashing through names. Philip, John Curtis, I'm doing the best I can. And Patrick, good night, everyone. Darren James, Starlight. Well, we had lots of people commenting tonight. Mark Collard. Like you said, the video is here for people to watch later. Nobody has to show up on the live show. I'm going to do the work anyway, right? It's wonderful to get people to come by, but I understand not everybody can show up during my live show. I also know I'm censored heavily. Annie Archie, hi there. Adrian Johnson, Ed M. Yeah, we had lots of people tonight. Well, drop by in the comments section. A lot of people don't drop in the comments section, of course. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, folks. It's a lot of stress today for me. I'm not sure if I'll be back tomorrow night. I might need a day off tomorrow to recover from this today. I'm pretty good, right? I really do. I don't like missing a day. The industry doesn't deserve a day off from being pointed out. Andrew B. Hi, Andrew. IXOXI. I'm almost through the comments. I'm just going to end the poll here in a minute. I'll bring it back up on the screen in a second here. Victor, see what I mean by it's so easy to miss somebody, right? Yeah, I should take the day off, James. You're right. Let's bring up the poll as we close the poll down. So we got 73 votes, and appropriately, the right answer is no. We got 59 thumbs up, so that's a huge deal. So we're going to end the poll. End the poll right there. I agree with James. I should take the day off. I should take the day off. Good night, everybody. God bless everybody, and hugs for everybody. Daryl Murray. Yeah, we'll have to do coffee, Marge. I didn't see you today. You know, it's like I got blinders on when I'm working each day. I've never passed you by and I say hello to you if I see you, but I don't look. I'm single-minded, right? That's one of my big problems. And I got no idea where you're working to, so I'll figure it out. We'll have to do coffee in the near future. Timber, Traveler, Pendulum, yeah, I forgot you. Ryan Underwood. Gee, a lot of people here tonight. The Wise Person, you're welcome. Okay, well, let's call it a night, I guess. How close are we to getting through all of these studies I got here? Just the ones I got loaded up tonight. I got no idea. Yeah, we'll never get through it all, eh? We're almost down to it. I'm just trying to figure out. Just give me a second here. Oh, there we go. I'm going to flash through the rest of the ones I got here. Just so we get through the rest of them tonight. Just one, even if they're only 1 or 2 seconds for each one. Because we're almost through all the studies. So we're roughly, tonight, you would have been exposed to... I'll give you an actual number in a minute. Hang on. Let me just flash through the rest of these studies. So at least they were... It's like a jab from a punch. God, no. Each of these studies should make it just cringe, really. It does show you how incredibly lunatic the nuclear industry actually is. And incredibly dangerous this industry actually is. This bizarre death cult known as nuclear actually is. And I know when I was putting this together, I was like, I probably shouldn't include this study and that study and these studies. But how can you not, see? And when you look at all the people on those studies, some of these studies, it's madness. And they claim they don't know jack about radioactive fallout. Really? She's no good to claim that to me or you. You know better. We all understand at this point, tonight in particular, that this industry has no checks and balances, and that we're obligated, because nobody else would do the job. It's our obligation. I'm going to keep going until I flash through all of them. We're almost there. I apologize for not being able to articulate each one of these, but if you're watching it later, it'll be just as confusing. But subconsciously, this stuff absolutely gets imprinted. So even just flashing through it all, right? I can't possibly cover all of this. This is only a fraction. And every one of these are important. I'm trying my best to get through it. And then I'm going to give you the number of studies that you got a blink of here tonight. And then you equate that with how is it that nuclear scientists and media can claim they don't know if there's any adverse effects from radiation, when the documentation tonight clearly demonstrates that they know better, unequivocally. Yeah, we'll never get through them all, will I? You can't physically sit here and go through each study, because there you go, just one more, that's it there. So that's, I'll tell you the number here in a second. How many studies do you think I gave you tonight? I'll give you an estimate in a second. That's the end of this show, but let me give you an estimate. It was over 900 studies tonight. 900 studies that unequivocally shows that radiation is extremely dangerous. I think that's really cool. I think that's exceptional. And I hope you do too. Have a great night and a great day tomorrow. God bless you and your friends and your families and your loved ones and your pets and your communities and your precious moments on this planet. The industry is doing everything it can to destroy you. It's your turn to kick the industry and straighten it out. Have a great night. 587, 100, 130, Thinker says. 477. It was over 900 studies tonight that I showed. I think that's incredible. You'll never see that anywhere else on the planet. There really isn't anybody else has ever done it or will do that for you. And I'm feel extremely privileged that you joined me and heard me out. Have a great night, folks. We'll see everybody on the next show.